Welcome back. Food production has increased over the years and South Africa has remained a net exporter. However, the Agricultural Business Chamber says that rising input costs mean that economies of scale will continue being a dominant feature in the South African farming sector. To talk more on grain production, grain prices and storage, I'm joined by Professor Johann Kirsten, Director of the Bureau for Economic Research from Stellenbosch University. Professor, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. So I want to talk broadly about agriculture before we focus a little bit more specifically on grain. In a recent report, the Competition Commission found that there's a decline in the number of farmers, and that's taken place over the last couple of years and obviously been exacerbated quite heavily by the COVID-19 pandemic. What does that mean, though, for the value chain in agriculture and for South African food markets?
Yeah, maybe we should just start with the complication around the farm numbers, because we don't really understand what is happening. We have anecdotes about farmers in certain sectors, grain production, for example, where there's some consolidation. We have drop in numbers of dairy farmers, but all of that doesn't really lead to a concentration in the production at primary level. It does point to some concerns about food security in the future, but I think the reality is the point you made about economies of scale. Farmers have used the economies of scale principle to enlarge their operations and thereby counter low margins and thereby also ensuring that they also go up higher in the value chain and thereby doing additional steps. Some farmers are in the grain production, for example, are also in storage business. Some are in trading business, and therefore they are taking over some of the additional functions that other role players used to play. But in essence, the drop in numbers in farmers do not really impact on the value chain. It remains well organized and well structured to serve a large urban population.
Let's get back to the big players in a moment, but I want to ask, just because it's a concern for many smaller emerging or developing farmers, what does concentration or a drop in number of farmers and economies of scale, what's the impact on emerging farmers?
Yeah, it's really difficult because your value chain needs to be connected with new entrants into the agricultural sector. So for anybody that is operating in a small scale, their natural market will be local, shorter supply chains, a local village, a local town. But they can also be linked to a larger player, such as an agribusiness firm, where their small production numbers or volumes are produced and delivered, and their aggregation takes place, and then it moves up into the value chain to the larger processors. So the scale is only important if you want to improve your profitability. So that's the issue it's really driving agriculture globally, is the fact that your margins is so small at the primary level that you have to move into scale operation or have to add value at your own premises.
Let's talk about those margins now. And we know that the AgBiz Grain Symposium is taking place next week. And part of the discussions there are going to be around pricing of grain storage. Why is that a key factor?
It's an interesting symposium, probably from an unknown and very little known sector in the agricultural sector, because we all think that bread comes from the shelf or from the nearest baker. But from the grain produced by the wheat farmer or the grain produced by the maize farmer, there are a number of steps that play an important role. And the group that meet next week are those that store grain, because we all know that grain is harvested in a period. For maize, it's between May and June, July. In wheat, it's normally around November, December. And then that grain must be available for processing, for trading, for storage throughout the year. So this group of companies play an important role then in terms of the handling, the trading, the storage of grain, and therefore the issues at play is how do you do this efficiently so that there's not additional cost in the value chain that eventually play into the end product for the consumer. So also managing margins in the chain is a critical component for these companies. Critical issues for them is the cost of transport, and in the past most grain has been transported on rail, which makes it very cheap, but nowadays most goes on road. And we could also see the importance of this network of transporters and handlers in our export industry, because maize goes to the export market, wheat comes into the import market, and therefore your functionality of these players are very important. So the way they manage the market, they manage the margins, manage cost, and how do they adopt technology that is efficient to bring about a better timing in delivery and a cost saving as well, could be very important for either the farmer delivering to them or for the processors and traders and bakers at the other end of the chain.
Professor Kirsten, I would have loved to have more time with you. Very important conversations taking place. As you say, very few people hear of these conversations, but ultimately it could affect the price of the loaf of bread that is sitting on the shelf that we all purchase. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to the results of that Agbiz Grain Symposium next week. That was Professor Johann Kirsten, Director of the Bureau for Economic Research from Stellenbosch University.